everybody. I'm Marianne Capehart, Community Program Director, Coordinator, excuse me, of the Waterways Program. This is part of our brown bag series. We've had about 20 brown bags this year. So they're on our YouTube channel. So this is a wonderful opportunity to present to you a great topic on the reintroduction, of beavers. We're here today with the Watershed Management Group, Lauren Monheim and Joaquin Murrieta. But if you're not familiar with the Watershed Management Group, please check them out. It's a wonderful nonprofit out of Tucson. They do all sorts of amazing things and are responsible for a network of rain harvesting installations and river restoration and policy work. And I took their training and they're just awesome. So we're really happy to have them today to talk about the reintroduction of the beaver into the San Pedro River. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here. And with that, I will pass it over to you. I think that would be Lauren.
Thank you for that warm welcome, Alex and Marianne. Super excited to be here. Again, my name is Lauren, and I am Watershed Management Group's River Run Network Program Manager. And with me today is Joaquin Murrieta, Watershed Management Group's Cultural Ecologist. And then we also have Mike Foster, who has just been instrumental in the survey and our Release the Beavers campaign. And I'll just give a little bit of background on Watershed Management Group and what we call our River Run Network, which is what this, our Release the Beavers campaign and what this whole survey was through. So I'll give a little bit of background on that, and I'm going to talk about the US side of our survey from this year. So, our River Run Network is defined as a group of community members working towards our 50-year vision, which is to see the rivers flowing again in Tucson. This network and this vision spread far and wide, reaching over 2,000 people from Tucson and beyond. Through this program, we involve our members in many different activities. More recently, through COVID-19, we've adapted many of our events and classes to be virtual. So through this program, though, we bring people on creek walks, which are in-person events walking through our different creeks and rivers in Tucson and elsewhere. And this picture right here is from one of our beaver surveys from last year, which is super exciting. So we considered that one of our events in creek walks. And river cleanups as well. In the Tucson area. We also involve our community members in our restoration work. So we host what we call restoration workshops. And these photos are from Cienegas Creek, which is near the Vale area. We involve our members in community science. So we have our Flow 365 monitoring program. This is a subset group of River Run Network members who track the flow in our rivers around Tucson, helping us to see the progress toward our 50-year vision. Which is restoring Tucson's heritage of flowing creeks and rivers. And one of the ways that we, where's my mouse? There we go. One of the ways that we work towards this goal and vision is to work in our neighboring watersheds alongside people in those communities through the River Run Network. And to eventually see beaver in Tucson's creeks and rivers as well by assessing population of beavers in our neighboring watershed, the San Pedro River. So this is a slide about our 3 main goals of our Release the Beavers campaign through the River Run Network. So we advocate for the release of beavers along the San Pedro River, which we were involved in one back in April, I believe. We also hope to rehydrate our creeks and rivers in Tucson. And the big thing that we're talking about today is wanting to monitor the health and distribution of beaver populations in the areas where there are beaver already in the San Pedro and the Santa Cruz watersheds. And just a bit of history as well and why we're so passionate about beaver. In the late 1800s, beaver were exterminated from the binational San Pedro River 21 years ago, so in 2000, and about 1999 as well. Beaver were reintroduced to the San Pedro River riparian conservation area, which is where our US side survey took place. And since then, their population has grown and expanded into Mexico, which is something that we'll discuss. It did shrink in numbers in the US, but last year we concluded that we had seen enough signs to say that there were about 12 to 15 beavers along the San Pedro National Riparian Conservation Area, or what we also call the Sprinka. So though we don't have any official conclusions from this year's survey, because it was only conducted 2 weeks ago, about 4 weeks ago or so. So we haven't fully analyzed those results quite yet. Our volunteers and staff found a lot of beaver signs along the San Pedro River this year. And I'll talk about the Mexico side, but I have some pictures. This is one photo from our US side, and you can just see how beautiful this area is. If you can kind of see through all the bushes, there are 2 people walking along the side doing the survey. Not only were they along the banks, but they also walked through the water. So, but just a little bit more of logistical information. So to start off with the US side, we broke the area up into small stretches to make the walking a little bit easier. These stretches were usually about 4 miles or so, but some of them did go up to 7 miles to survey one stretch or one area. Our volunteers and staff leads were either on the banks of the rivers or in the water, as you can see in this photo here. The water in some areas was non-existent. So some of the San Pedro on the US side is dry, but some of them, as you can see in this photo even, were thigh-high. And so there's a lot of variation in these areas, and it was just really incredible to experience this and see photos from it in the different places. So, and you also might be asking why we were in the water, because it's late November, early December, it's kind of cold, but it's actually a lot easier to spot beaver signs while you're in the water. One of the easiest things to spot while you're in the water is what's called a Beaver Lodge. And you can see this is a bit of a blown up example of it. So it's a little bit smaller than this. This is just how the photo fit onto the screen. But this is an example of a lodge, and it was found on the survey this year. So our volunteers were walking through the water and in the riverbeds and on the banks of the river looking for signs of beaver. And this is a very rough estimate of what they found. So this map shows our findings on both sides of the river. So you can see that this pink line right here, oh, it even says United States and Mexico. So that's the border right there. So you can see there are quite a few signs on the US side. So overall, there were about 75 distinct signs of beaver activity along the stretches that we observed through our survey. And that's total on the US and the Mexico side. So this doesn't necessarily mean that there are 75 beaver or that we saw 75 beavers. But this amount of signs and this many signs is hopeful for the population study growth. And I'll ask a quick question to see if anybody knows. But does anyone know when beavers are most active? I think I can open up the chat, maybe. There we go. Anyone know when beavers are most active?
Well, they don't hibernate like other places, so they're pretty much active throughout the year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mike, I think I was, yeah, definitely. I think I was more getting at that they're nocturnal, right?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
yeah.
It's all good. It's all good. But yeah, they're super active. They don't hibernate, and they are nocturnal. So they are most active at night. So unfortunately, none of our surveys were at night. So even though we do have some stories of some of our volunteers saw our furry friends swimming through the water really quickly away from us as we were walking down the banks and in the water, we didn't get any photographs of actual beaver. But last year, one of our leads, Steve Merkley, who is a Cochise College professor and who helped us this year as well, he was able to place a camera in a private residence and get this cute little photo of one of our furry beaver friends along the Springa on private land. So I just wanted to share that with you. And I would like to introduce Joaquin. So that is all that I have about the US side. But I'll introduce Joaquin Murrieta to talk about the survey on the Mexico side. And we can start with a video from Mike Foster. I think I can stop presenting. There we go. If it'll load, cool. Yeah, I can start with this video from Mike Foster. And everybody can still hear that sound.
Good.
We're on the San Pedro River, and this is a binational effort.
Es un esfuerzo binacional en el río San Pedro.
With much amistad, with much friendship, we're monitoring the beavers.
Además de monitorear los castores, esto es un esfuerzo binacional y mucha amistad entre los dos países.
Today was a great day. Today was the last day of the first binational beaver survey along the San Pedro River of southeastern Arizona and northern Sonora, Mexico. In 1905, beaver were extirpated along the San Pedro River, and it wasn't until 1999 that beaver were restored to the river by the Arizona Game and Fish Department on the Bureau of Land Management San Pedro Riparian National Conservation Area, which stretches from the international border all the way up to the town of St. David. The beaver numbers began to increase. At one time, we think the beaver populations were over 100 from the initial 16 that were released. But then what happened in recent years is we've had some droughts, and the number of beaver have gone down. We've been doing surveys here in Arizona for about the last 20 years, and their numbers are going down. Well, when the beaver numbers were great, they expanded their range, and some of them went upriver into Mexico, and they followed the river until they found these wet areas that were created by ranchers for their cattle. They call these represas, but we just call them dammed up areas. And the beaver went into these represas because they had a constant source of water throughout the year, because they're like lakes, and they stayed there. Well, the cool thing is that the beaver that went up here into these little dammed up areas are in stable populations. We're thinking that these beaver, once the river begins to flow more, should the climate become wetter, will come out of their repositories and migrate down the river and begin to replenish our populations here in the United States.
So with the ranchers, I mean, they have these represas. They have these man-made, human-made dams for cattle. And that's the body of water that cattle used. And they distribute that water to the ranch. And so that's where the beavers are. So it's very interesting to see that relationship between cattle, beaver, and ranching. So beavers are secure. I mean, they have a body of water. They're expanding their habitat. So it becomes kind of a natural nursery of beavers here in Sonora.
It was really interesting to me because for years I'd been hearing that there were some large populations of beaver up on the Mexican side in the reservoirs. And, you know, it was just kind of hard for me to understand that because our numbers had gone down so low, and how could their numbers be so high? But when I went out there and did the survey, we found a lot of evidence, and now I believe that this is where a lot of the beaver have taken refuge, up here in these reservoirs and wet areas up in the upper part of the San Pedro watershed. What I found really cool was to realize that in Mexico, they've been doing surveys for many years. There are a number of environmental organizations down there that have teamed up to do the extreme upper San Pedro watershed. Well, since we'd been doing surveys down here, finally this year we decided to get together, the US and the Mexican team.
And for the first time in the history of the San Pedro, I believe, we are doing this binationally. We are looking at the health of the river, looking at beavers. Buenos dias, good morning everybody. This is day 2 of the binational beaver count we are doing with a bunch of partners here in Sonora, Mexico. We are at La Cieneguita, and check this out. This is one of the biggest madrigueras that we have seen in the last 2 days. So there is total evidence that there are beavers in here. So that's a really good sign.
I am Antonio Esquer. I am the coordinator for the state of Sonora's the Profauna office. We are working in this area, in this case, collaborating with in a binational effort with a team monitoring beavers. And this is very important for us because beavers is a protected species in Mexico. Beavers can be a natural restoration tool to return the natural condition or the historical natural condition of the San Pedro River.
I'm Laura Paulson. I'm the Watershed Restoration Director for Watershed Management Group. And we just completed 2 days of beaver monitoring on the San Pedro River on the Mexico side in the upper watershed. And this was a really great effort and a great example of binational collaboration and coordination. There are several local organizations in Mexico that have been working in the watershed for a very long time. And that includes Profauna, Naturalia. Both are local conservation organizations based in Hermosillo with a long history of working in the watershed. We also had participation, of course, from Watershed Management Group, Friends of the Huachucas, and CONAMP, which is the National Commission for Protected Natural Areas for Mexico. This year was the first time that we did this monitoring on the Mexico side of the border. And so next year we do plan to expand more broadly to include community members from both Cananea and some local towns within the watershed on the Mexico side, and then as well as engaging more participation from US volunteers and participants as well.
This is Mike Foster reporting from the San Pedro River watershed in southeastern Arizona and northern Sonora, Mexico. Que les vayan bien. So it was very much in our interest to work with the Mexican team and discover that they might be helping us out in a major way to reestablish our beaver populations.
Thank you so much for watching that video. And I'll present and introduce again Joaquin, and I think he's going to have Mike talk as well.
Yeah, gracias, Lauren. Thank you, Lauren, and very happy to see you here, Mike, as well, on the last minute invitation. And thank you again to all the community of Sierra Vista and the University of Arizona Extension for letting us come and talk to you about the importance of water, of rivers, and all the diversity of flora and fauna that they have in our communities. Why are we doing this as an organization is very, very important. Because one is water security for our communities. And second is water and riparian river health, using or looking at the behavior of beavers in this binational river, which is the San Pedro. And third, we have this crazy idea, as Lauren mentioned, of bringing back beavers and health of rivers, particularly in the area of Tucson. So we also are learning from the beavers in the San Pedro, because our vision 40, 50 years from now, of course, we want to have beavers in Tucson. And so we're looking at the importance of these species, of the importance of river health, and the importance of collaboration with community and collaboration internationally, in this case with Mexico. So for me, the beavers are putting us all that together. And this is the team that participated in the Mexico Beaver Survey. As was mentioned in the video, it was several organizations, as well as one school that it wasn't, I'm sorry, one school that it wasn't mentioned, a high school, and one of the teachers is there participating with the idea to have additional college schools participating by next year in the Beaver Survey. Lauren mentioned that, yes, beavers are nocturnal. They like the dark. And with that extent, we try to start our beaver surveys in Mexico very, very early. I mean, we woke up at 4 in the morning, and by 5:30 to 6, it was still dark, with the hope that we might be able to see them active. We didn't see them on the first day. We saw a lot of evidence. If you want to move it to the next, Lauren. So it was a lot of logistics. It was a lot of walking. I think between the two teams in the US and in Mexico, we walk, and correct me, Lauren and Mike, around 50 miles of river or corridors, tributaries of the river. It's not that I walk 50 miles. I think I walk up to 12. But the teams all together walk 50 miles of river. And that's very, very impressive. And here we are on the Mexico side. And we had scientists, we have community volunteers, we have teachers. And so it was very neat, as well as we were looking for beavers to understand their knowledge, their inspiration, and their passion about river restoration. So that was very neat to spend 2-3 days with them as well in the field. Next one. And also the impressive riparian health and riparian presence of different flora, different fauna that we encounter. For me, this picture represents a very healthy riparian system along the San Pedro. And that's also very, very important to understand, and in the relation of presence of water as well as presence of river. Next one. And most of look at this. This is, I think, the first picture you saw in the introduction, but right there in the middle, you can see one of the beaver dams that are built by beavers. And it also is very interesting to remember that the San Pedro River, like 100 to 150 years ago, it wasn't really a river. It was more a series of ciénegas. It was a connectivity of bodies of water. So it wasn't really a meandering river. Meandering river appeared again, 100 years ago, because of the presence of cattle. And cattle start shaping or reshaping the river. And also with the presence of cattle and diminishing the population of beavers, that's when we start seeing more of a river in the San Pedro. So two species that are important here on why we have a river the way it looks today One is cattle and second is beavers. So this picture for me is imitating the river as it used to be 100 years ago. So it's very nice to start learning about that because beavers were the ones creating these ciénegas. And next one. And so look, this is another picture, but again, you can see a huge dam right there in the middle. And this is an extension of a natural dam created by beavers that is expanding the ranchers' dams, lakes that they have done. So it's very interesting to see that symbiosis between ranching and beavers on how the beavers is expanding this ciénega type of wetland. And that's one of the reasons that we're starting to understand of the regular or the increasing numbers of beavers on the Mexico side because of these permanent bodies of water that are here pretty much all the time. Again, this is on a tributary of the San Pedro River. Next one, and it is on a private ranch. And we were able to walk on these marshy areas, and I think Mike Foster here was the person that got this picture is taken by a drone, but Mike Foster was able to walk pretty much all the way inside this marshy area. Mike, do you want to share a little bit of your experience when you were walking in these areas?
Yeah, well, I don't mind getting my feet cold and wet. It's part of the fun of it, I think. And I saw this area and I wanted to get a closer look at it. And it was just so tempting, and I'm kind of a swamp rat from Michigan. So I just walked into it, and I wear sandals. I don't wear socks, I wear sandals, and my feet get wet, but then they dry out relatively quickly. So I walked through there pretty quickly. I was getting wet, but that enabled me to get a much closer look. And as you can see, there's a cattail that had been cut down by a beaver in the lower left-hand corner. And so as you walk in there, you get to see better evidence and get a better survey, have a better survey done. And as I got in there, I saw there were all kinds of Fresnos, the ash tree, as well as the Gooding cottonwood, the Gooding willow and the Fremont cottonwood that had all been eaten. So it was really good to get in there and see that. And I was thinking next year, and this is Las Cieneguitas again, it would be great to I have an inflatable kayak and take it in there and get in some of these areas, because while you can walk in while the water's shallow, there are other areas where the water's deeper and you'd be swimming. So an inflatable kayak is my recommendation for next year.
Thank you, Mike. And so yes, we do want to take a kayak next year to further visit or explore these ciénegas that are on these ranching communities in the Mexico side. And so let's move to the next one. And the evidence that we keep encountering, like these beaver dams that we keep showing to you, like the shoes that we saw, like the madrigueras or the shelters of beavers that we encounter. And as Lauren mentioned, we are looking into that evidence and also extrapolating into the numbers of beavers that might be present in both sides of the border. We're going to have those numbers ready sometime early next year. And right now I'll take advantage and invite you actually. This was the first time we did it binationally in the history of the river, and we want to do it again. Usually we do this in the fall, October and November. Why? Because the weather is nicer. There is no presence of the snakes still there, but they are hibernating at that time. And so that's when we do this. And also at that time is when beavers start rebuilding their dams if we had like this summer a nice monsoon, rainy seasons. Sometimes these dams disappear. So by that time, beavers start rebuilding their dams once again in the river. So that's nice to see that coming back of the beavers to start rebuilding their home, their dams. And so that's why we choose October and November and to do this river beaver survey. So you're going to hear from us. We're going to hopefully invite additional members of our communities in Sierra Vista and Cananea and additional towns on both sides of the border. And so let's move forward. And the beauty of this, let's go back. The beauty of this is that there is great evidence of beavers. There is great evidence of riparian health. There is great evidence of presence of water. So beavers are kind of very good indicator of riparian health. Very good indicator of water infiltration. Very good indicator of quality of water. So in addition of these wonderful pictures, we are learning that with a beaver presence, we are expanding the water infiltration. We are expanding the habitat for beavers and other species like cottonwoods, and for that, for birds, and for that, for additional native toads and that type of thing. So just by looking at these species of beaver, beaver is a keystone species that is telling us the presence of additional health on the riparian corridors of the San Pedro. And the beauty of the San Pedro is that and the beavers is that it's connecting two communities. It's connecting Sierra Vista and it's connecting Cananea through this wonderful river that we have here. And so by inviting the community to come and understand these rivers, to come and understand the beavers, is very, very important to us. So we are connecting people, beavers, and riparian health for the future of our communities in water security. So it's so many things that I'm learning, that we are learning with the presence or absence of beavers in our river corridors. And also 30, 40 years from now, we want to see these type of images in the Santa Cruz, in the Tucson area as well. That's one of our learning processes that we're doing. And I want to be there. So we better hurry up and understand and do these type of experiences in our riparian corridors. Anything else to add, Mike or Lauren? Because I think this is the last image that we want to share.
If you like, I can give a little history about getting involved with the beaver surveys and how it's grown.
Please do so, because you've been doing this for quite some time, Mike.
So as Lauren said, the beaver were started to be released in 1999, and by 2002, they'd released 16 beaver collected from around the state where they were causing problems. And I've heard that some of them were creating wetlands near the airport, which encouraged birds that were interfering with the airlines. So, but if we get some more beaver, that would be great. But at that time, I was working for the school system in Sierra Vista, and I would always go down to the river because I love it. As I said, I'm from Michigan, and it reminds me of green, wet areas, and I'd spend all day walking down on the river. And I started to do a video series for the Friends of the San Pedro River, and I got to know the biologist, Marcia Radke, who was working the whole Sprinka. And we would talk about things we'd seen on the river, and I just gradually began reporting to her about beaver dams I'd seen, and I shared little videos I'd take of the beaver dam. And I then also would go out and try to get actual video of the beaver. And so it eventually led into a thing where I decided to walk the whole Sprinka, which is 45 miles from the border up to almost St. David. And I had a friend, and he would bring his GPS device, and we'd go out, and it would take us, about almost 2 months to walk the whole Sprinka, because we're mostly doing it on weekends. And we would turn over the information, and Watershed Management has the data that we've taken, and I have it too, and we'd be glad to share it. But as I said in the video, the numbers went up to about 105 beaver, and then they've gone down. So we've been concerned about the drop, but so it was just me and Steve doing it, and then Steve Merkley from a friend of mine named Steve, and then Steve Merkley from Cochise College joined about 3 years ago, and he brought some students, and Watershed just began to get involved in that time. And then the last 2 years, it was both of us. But it was both the Watershed Management Group and Cochise. And this year, I went out with my group, and we were going to do the stretch up to Hereford Road. And I was amazed because, as I said, in previous years, it was just me and another guy. I get out to Hereford Road, and there were 20 people out there waiting. And I thought, wow, what a great groundswell this is to see all this, wonderful participation now. And I know that initially Watershed Management Group was concerned that they were going to be stepping on the toes of the Friends of the San Pedro River, but that's not the case at all. We're very delighted to have Watershed Management Group and Cochise College helping, and Laura Paulson's writing a grant now for the National Park Service to give us some funding and get other people involved, including the mule team. And I work for the Friends of the Huachuca Mountains. So in this area, we have the Friends of the Huachuca Mountains, the Friends of the San Pedro River, the mule team, and we're all excited about in helping and plan to be part of it. But the other, great ground swelling effort was, of course, the binational part. And, thank you to Watershed Management and Joaquin for inviting me down to be a part of that. I just thought it was a total good time to go down there, and I always love to try to speak Spanish as best I can, and so it was fun. We had a team of almost about 20 down there, and we spent I think it was 3 nights, and got to see those areas of the upper San Pedro watershed, and those represas are really impressive, and to see the numbers of beaver was so exciting. One of the things that's not always apparent is that, when the beaver were released and they went up into Mexico, from the Sprinka up into Mexico, they also got into Los Fresnos and then continued upstream up into the United States again at the base of the Huachuca Mountains. And one day I was driving through the Huachucas over the Coronado National Memorial, came down into a stream, and I thought, my God, it looks like a beaver had chewed down that Gooding willow. And I went over to it, and there were beaver teeth marks on it. And so these beaver are really tenacious. They went from the United States into Mexico, back up into the United States. And from there, they traveled across land, which is something you don't always imagine. The beaver will cross land, and they got into a stock tank in Campini Mesa. And then I believe the story is they went and continued over to the Santa Cruz watershed. So these beaver are really tenacious and opportunistic, taking opportunities to expand their range. And another thing that may not be apparent to a lot of people is just how, what little amount of water they can survive in. Just north of the border, the new border wall is, I found this little hole, maybe 10 feet long and maybe 4 feet wide. And I thought, well, I wonder if there are any beaver here. And I looked at it, and my God, a beaver actually had been chewing on the branches there. And I've seen beaver in other situations eking out an existence in whatever water holes remain. And that's really encouraging to realize how tenacious they are and how they can survive. Anyways, yeah, I'm so delighted for that, to the help. And if anybody has any questions, I can try to. Didn't really have anything prepared. This is last minute, but if anybody has any questions about what's going on with the beaver, somebody asked a question about.
Thank you, Mike. There are a few observations on the border wall and implications of wildlife movement including beavers. And yes, that was one of the very sad images that stay in my head. I started walking on the Mexico side from the water wall south. And to see that, it is a wall. And to see that, I mean, maybe the only wildlife movement that you can see crossing that wall is the little desert rats, animals about that big. But a beaver is about this big. It cannot cross that wall. So it's very sad to see that we are stopping wildlife movement on these wildlife corridors, like the San Pedro River and other rivers. And so anyway, that was a little sad. There we are working towards that end in terms of how can we make this work? Because nature is being impacted so bad about this wall, but also we understand the human conditions of border crossings and things like that. So how do we create a balance with that? That's a hard one. And but to change the tone of the conversation, we start walking from south of the border wall in the San Pedro, and after maybe a quarter of a mile to a half a mile, that's when the water started appearing in the San Pedro. It was a beautiful scenery. It was a wonderful scenery to see the incredible cottonwoods, the meandering rivers, the water flowing, all very old evidence of beavers in that section. And another comment on the stream on the chat was that ranchers sounds or it looks like they are doing a great job in terms of cattle management and beaver management. Some are. I mean, that's a big. We are working with ranchers in Mexico for best management practices of restoration and conservation on grasslands and riparian areas. So some of them were part of this survey. So that's kind of nice to see that interaction of ranchers, beavers, and watershed health. Not all the ranchers are doing this. We also have issues with ranchers and beavers in Mexico. Sometimes we have found or we have heard about beavers being shot, being killed. Because they're eating the cottonwoods, because they're eating the shade for the cattle, which are the big trees. So anyway, we are working with education, we are working with outreach, we are working with best management practices for cattle grazing as well as for beaver health. So I've been doing this ranching work for quite some time in Mexico and in Arizona. Actually for over 15 years working with ranchers. So yes, it's a constant adaptation, it's a constant learning, and it's a constant understanding on how we humans keep changing, putting challenges into nature. Are there any observations? I think this would be a good time if you have any additional questions for Lauren, for Mike, for myself, or for the University of Arizona Extension.
Thank you, Joaquin. I see there's a question that came in early from Gail saying, how did the cattle ranching create a river from a string of ciénegas?
Yeah, that's a great observation. As we used to understand these rivers, this stream of ciénegas, and then beaver disappear, and then cattle appears. With cattle, you diminish the vegetation cover, and beavers used to stop the force of water. So now you have more velocity of water. There is no little dams stopping that velocity of water. The little dams were with the beavers. So now you're starting to create a stream between ciénegas. Some of those ciénegas start drying up. And so now you have a stream that is creating a river. That happened it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. And with that stream, you are embanking, or you're creating the conditions for the river to start flowing. Hopefully I'm making sense and I'm explaining myself. So is the disappearing of one species, which is beaver, and is the appearance of heavy grazing on the other end that start creating the conditions of water moving. Okay, and that's how the San Pedro, it is in the shape it is right now.
You're muted.
Correct.
Marianne.
Ciénega, it is a marsh, it is a body of water that they used to be connected, a series of ciénegas. That was the San Pedro habitat 100 to 150 years ago. Yeah.
I'm just a quick question, if no one else does, regarding best management practices for cattle. Does that involve sort of letting things fallow and moving cows to different areas for different portions of the season or different years?
Yeah, yes. And we also need to remember or to acknowledge that in some areas of Arizona on the San Pedro, as well as in Mexico, these are working ranchers. This is the livelihood of some families. And so how do we, it's not a protected area. It's private land or communal land in Mexico, and is the livelihood of a lot of families. So how do we balance that grazing? So there are techniques, there are practices that allow us to do some best management practices. Yes, the fencing, for example, and rotation of cattle is an important one. Cattle exclusion areas on the riparian corridors, we're doing that. Also the carrying capacity of the grasslands. How much cows can you actually have in a piece of property? We are also learning that it's not the amount of cows, is the time that the cows are on a specific site. So rotation becomes very, very important. And now with new technologies like electric fencing, that is making it a lot easier for ranching in these areas. So actually in Mexico, we are just experimenting in several plots on rotating cattle every 3 days. So with electric fencing, we move that. And so we have, imagine 20 head of cows per hectare. And so we're moving them pretty frequently. And that's very simple, very easy to do. And as you move them, you follow the land for over a year. So the grasslands are established very well. And that's what we're learning. That's what we're doing. And but we also need to recognize that this is the livelihood of the ranching families. So how do we balance that? So it's a lot of education, it's a lot of outreach, and it's a lot of trust and understanding on this. So it's not just coming and putting fencing and this. It's the conversation, is the understanding of the riparian health for all of us.
Thank you. I see Gail also asked, any evidence of beavers in the Santa Cruz?
The evidence we had is for a few years ago. And I'm talking about 7 to 10 years ago. Same as Mike Foster mentioned, that some beavers went into the Huachucas on Bear Creek, I believe is the creek. And some beavers start migrating from the Los Fresnos area, which is part of the Bear Creek in Mexico, start migrating into the Santa Cruz. So there was evidence of beaver presence in the Santa Cruz 7 or 10 years ago. We don't know what happened. We need to go check it out. We haven't heard back from any of our partners, colleagues in the Santa Cruz area in Mexico. But the hope is that the river is still flowing in the San Rafael and Mexico area of the Santa Cruz River. So the conditions for beaver to be there are there, but we don't know if the actual beavers are there. Eventually, that's we want to expand these beaver surveys into the Santa Cruz. So that would be fantastic if we can actually do that next year. We're writing proposals and grants for continuing the beaver survey for the next year and following years for that.
And apparently they're in the Beavers River, which is
correct,
south of Agua Prieta.
Yeah, same as we're doing here with this beaver binational beaver survey we did this year and last year. We're hearing, or people are contacting us in the Rio Grande, Rio Bravo area, like in Texas and New Mexico. People are contacting us from Coahuila and Texas areas in other rivers. So I think we're creating a very interesting process here on riparian health and beaver presence in our rivers, and something that is new binationally anyway, because Mike Foster has been monitoring beavers for quite some time, like 15 years, Mike?
Yeah, even close to 20.
Yeah, so doing it binational is very interesting because beavers move. and now the evidence is showing us that there is potentially more beaver numbers on the Mexico side of the San Pedro as it used to in the US side. So now our theory, and Mike and I we talk extensively about that. Well, maybe the beavers from Mexico are trying to come back and populate the areas of the US San Pedro. And that's one of the challenges with the border wall. So can beavers actually be able to move? Right now they cannot. And so anyway, those are the challenges that we're seeing, and also challenges internationally that we're facing, and hard questions on how do we handle this one.
I was hoping, as far as that border wall goes, that they're supposed to open up the doors. They've made doors so that the water
There are doors
filled up, and during those times we used to hear about beaver surfing on floods and distributing themselves downriver. And so, hopefully when they open the doors and there are floods, the beaver can go through at that time, because otherwise you only have about 4 inches that an animal could get through, and maybe a small beaver could get through 4 inches, but I would think most beaver couldn't get through that. So over in Bear Creek, you don't have the wall yet, so they would still be able to get up Bear Creek. So the wall has caused some problems, but I don't think it's totally stopped them.
So they haven't opened the gates during the last monsoon.
Well, they did.
They did open them, so maybe there was some traveling. Okay. Yeah, or how about a beaver tunnel?
Something. Yeah, but that's the beauty. We're learning so much with beavers and with this cooperation. We need to be creative. Beaver tunnel, why not? And creativity comes with the community. So that's very interesting to look into different scenarios on how do we keep collaborating and working towards the health of our rivers.
I love the balance that you have between the communities and the beavers and the riparians, and that very balanced view of how we all have to kind of make it work for everybody. I think that's beautiful. Well, thank you all so much. Are there any final questions from our audience? we appreciate everyone coming. This is our last brown bag of the year, but we're looking forward to a lot of water-wise brown bags in the coming year. So stay tuned and email us if you want to be on our website. If you want to share that little intro, Alex, we can show people where to reach us. And but thank you so much. This is a wonderful way to end the year. It's such a great story. They're so cute. But that's
they are
might not
cute.
think they're cute, but and it's awfully nice to have you, Mike. I'm really glad you could join us today. Thank you for being really flexible and coming on last minute. So yes, as I mentioned before, we have a lot of things on our YouTube channel. So check it out and you can watch them at your leisure. So, and this is if you wanted to get on our mailing list, just email me, please. And you can get on our mailing list. Well, with that, I guess we'll sign off and say goodbye.
Thank you guys.
Everyone
so much.
have a wonderful holiday season. And we hope to all see you again very soon.
Yep.